September 23rd, 1780, three New York militiamen stop a lone rider on the road near Tarrytown. He's well-dressed, confident, and carrying a pass signed by an American general. Most patrols would have waved him straight through. These three don't. On a hunch, they pull him off his horse and search him anyway. Folded inside his boot, hidden under his stocking, they find detailed drawings of West Point's defenses and troop numbers that should never have left the fort. The rider gives his name as John Anderson. That name is a lie. And in a few hours, that lie is going to expose the single most dangerous act of treason in American history, and very nearly hand the British the fortress holding the entire Hudson River. Here's what almost nobody knows about that night. The only reason those papers reached George Washington, instead of disappearing into a cover-up, was a network of 6 ordinary people who had spent 2 years building an intelligence operation so quiet, so careful, that not even Washington, the general they worked for, knew most of their real names. One of them isn't a name at all. She's a number. 355. And 250 years later, historians still cannot tell you who she was. This is the story of America's greatest spy ring, and the woman history erased. By the fall of 1776, George Washington had learned a brutal lesson about the difference between courage and competence. That September, a young Connecticut schoolteacher named Nathan Hale volunteered to slip behind British lines on Long Island and report back on troop movements. He had no training, no real cover story, and no reliable way to get information out, even if he found any. Within days, the British caught him. On September 22nd, they hanged him as a spy. He was 21 years old. Hale's death taught Washington something the hard way. Bravery had never been the problem. The Continental Army had plenty of men willing to die for the cause. What it didn't have was an actual intelligence system. Trained agents, secure routes, a way to move information without getting everyone involved killed the first time out. By 1778, with the British dug firmly into New York City and Long Island, Washington needed eyes inside enemy territory more than ever. He turned to a 24-year-old major named Benjamin Tallmadge, a Setauket, Long Island native who'd graduated Yale in 1773 in the same class as Nathan Hale and one of his closest friends there. Tallmadge understood exactly what had gone wrong with Hale's mission because he'd lost a friend to it. What he built next wasn't going to be one brave volunteer walking into a British camp and hoping for the best. It was going to be a network, patient, deliberately boring, and built entirely out of people the British would never think to suspect. For 5 years, it would barely leave a fingerprint. It would also come down, on that one night on the Tarrytown Road, to a matter of hours.
Tallmadge didn't recruit strangers. He recruited people he'd grown up with. His first agent was Abraham Woodhull, a Setauket farmer and part-time merchant whose regular trips into British-occupied Manhattan to sell produce gave him a built-in excuse to be there. Washington himself is credited with picking their code name, borrowing it from Culpeper County, Virginia. Woodhull became Samuel Culper Sr. Getting intelligence out of Manhattan and back to Washington's headquarters meant building an entire relay system. Austin Rowe, a Setauket tavern keeper, carried messages on horseback between the city and Long Island under the cover of routine supply runs. From there, the information had to cross Long Island Sound itself, patrolled by British warships, which is where Caleb Brewster came in, a fearless whaleboat captain willing to run that gauntlet at night, over and over for years.
Then there was Anna Strong, a Setauket homemaker whose contribution looked, to anyone watching, like laundry. She hung a black petticoat on her clothesline when Woodhull had information ready to move, and a specific number of handkerchiefs beside it to signal which cove Brewster should use that night. A woman doing wash. Nobody in the British garrison ever looked twice. By 1779, Woodhull needed a source with access closer to the center of things than a farmer selling vegetables could ever get. So he recruited Robert Townsend, a Quaker merchant who ran a dry goods store and moonlighted as a society reporter for a loyalist newspaper, which put him in coffee houses full of British officers who talked freely in front of a friendly local journalist. Townsend became Samuel Culper Jr., and for the rest of the war, he was the ring's most valuable and most careful asset. Every piece of intelligence moved in code. Hundreds of common words and names reduced to numbers, written in invisible ink underneath an ordinary, forgettable letter about nothing at all. Washington himself was just a number, 711. Talmadge was 721. Townsend, the most protected identity of them all, was so careful that even Washington never learned his real name during the war. Nobody would find out who Samuel Culper Jr. actually was until 1929, a century and a half later, when a historian matched his handwriting to the old coded letters, almost by accident.
And then there's the one member of the ring nobody has ever been able to identify at all. In that August 1779 letter, Woodhull mentioned relying on the help of a 355 to gather intelligence in the city. Historians agree the number meant lady in the ring's code. Beyond that, almost nothing about her is certain. What we do know is that she had access other agents didn't. Woodhull described her as instrumental to the operation. Some historians believe she moved in New York's social circles, possibly even loyalist ones, which would have put her in rooms full of British officers with no reason to watch their tongues around a well-connected local woman. Theories about her identity range from Anna Strong herself to a common law wife of Robert Townsend's, to a woman with some connection to Major John Andre, the British officer who would later become central to the ring's most famous case. None of these theories has ever been proven. All of them remain to this day exactly that, theories.
There's one more detail that makes her story hard to leave alone. In October of 1780, Woodhull wrote to Talmadge that several of their contacts had been captured, including, in his words, one who had been ever serviceable to this correspondence. Around that same time, by several accounts, Robert Townsend withdrew unusually large sums of money and fell into what looked like a deep depression. Some historians have connected those two facts and concluded that Agent 355 was captured around this time, possibly held on one of the British prison ships anchored in New York Harbor, where conditions were so brutal that more American prisoners died aboard them than were killed in every land battle of the war combined. If that's what happened to her, she likely died there, anonymous, while the network she'd helped build kept running without her. We may never know her name. That's not really a failure of the historical record. It's the entire point of how well this operation worked. The Culper Ring's job was to disappear so completely that 250 years later, we'd still be guessing. For 5 years, this network fed Washington a steady stream of intelligence that shaped how he ran the war. And at least twice, it may have saved the American cause outright. In the summer of 1780, France finally sent real military muscle to help the Americans. A fleet and thousands of troops under the Comte de Rochambeau, landing at Newport, Rhode Island. It was arguably the single most important reinforcement of the entire war, and if the British had destroyed it on arrival, the alliance that eventually won independence might have collapsed before it fired a shot. Robert Townsend, working his contacts in occupied New York, picked up on British preparations for exactly that kind of ambush. Word reached Talmadge, then Washington, then the French themselves, in time to prepare for an attack that never landed the way the British had planned it. Most Americans have never heard of this particular near disaster, because it never actually happened. That's usually how you know an intelligence operation worked.
Townsend also caught wind of a British scheme that had nothing to do with muskets or cannons at all. A plan to flood the colonies with counterfeit continental currency, printed on paper stolen from Congress's own supplier, aimed at collapsing the American economy from the inside out. Getting that warning out in time helped blunt one of the more insidious weapons in Britain's arsenal. Not a bullet, but inflation, deliberately engineered to bankrupt a country that hadn't finished being born yet. Day to day, the Ring's reports on troop numbers, ship movements, and British morale gave Washington something almost no other general of the era had: a reasonably accurate picture of what his enemy was actually doing, instead of what he feared they might do. That sounds unglamorous. It's also, according to more than one historian who studied this war closely, close to the difference between an army that survives and one that doesn't. But the Ring's most famous moment, the one still debated by historians today, came in September of 1780, when years of quiet, careful information gathering collided head-on with the most dangerous secret of the entire war.
Back to that night on the Tarrytown Road. The rider the militiamen pulled off his horse wasn't really John Anderson. He was Major John Andre, Chief Intelligence Officer for the British Army in New York. And the American general he just left, the man who commanded West Point itself, was about to become the most notorious name in American history. The militiamen sent their prisoner and his papers up the chain of command, where a colonel who didn't yet understand what he had prepared to forward Anderson straight on to the one place he absolutely should not have gone: West Point and the custody of its commanding general. That's when Benjamin Talmadge stepped in. Talmadge had spent 2 years running a network that lived and breathed the details of British operations in New York, and something about this Anderson didn't sit right with him. He argued urgently that the prisoner and his papers should go to Washington instead. He couldn't fully overrule his superior, but he pushed hard enough to get the incriminating documents redirected, while Andre himself was held back. A decision that turned out to be the only thing standing between the British Army and one of the worst strategic disasters of the entire war. It's here that historians start to genuinely disagree. Some credit the Culper Ring's broader intelligence picture with sharpening Talmadge's instincts that day. Others point out there's surprisingly little direct evidence the Ring had any specific advance word of the plot itself, and that Talmadge's suspicion may simply have been the reflex of a very good intelligence officer doing his job in the moment.
Either way, the delay worked. Word reached Washington in time. It wasn't quite fast enough to catch the man Andre had been meeting. By the time anyone came for him, Benedict Arnold was already rowing for a British warship anchored in the Hudson. And he made it. Andre did not. He was tried and hanged weeks later. A fate Talmadge, who'd grown surprisingly fond of him during his custody, found he couldn't take any satisfaction in at all. The Culper Ring kept operating for 3 more years after that, all the way until the British finally evacuated New York in 1783. In that entire span, across 5 years of running agents inside the most heavily garrisoned city in North America, the British never fully unmasked a single one of them. Caleb Brewster came the closest, eventually identified as one of the raiders crossing the Sound. But even then, none of the men or women working alongside him were ever exposed with him. That kind of success comes with a strange cost. Most people who make it into history books get remembered because, on some level, they got caught or died dramatically, or somebody wrote their name down at the time. Nathan Hale is famous specifically because his mission failed and the British hanged him for it. The Culper Ring is barely known at all, specifically because their missions kept succeeding. Robert Townsend never told anyone, including his own family, what he'd done during the war. He carried the secret of Samuel Culper Jr. to his grave in 1838, and it stayed buried with him for another 91 years, until a historian named Morton Pennypacker matched his handwriting to the old coded letters in 1929 and finally proved what even Washington never confirmed while he was alive. Abraham Woodhull went back to farming. Austin Rowe ran his tavern. Anna Strong kept doing laundry.
presumably with slightly more meaning to it than her neighbors ever knew. When Washington became president, he tried more than once to publicly and financially thank the people who'd helped him win the war from the shadows. Several of them, out of old habit or old fear of loyalist neighbors who'd never quite forgiven them, quietly declined the attention.
And then there's Agent 355, the one member of this network history never got the chance to properly repay, because history never learned who she was in the first place. If the theories about her capture are right, she may have died in the hold of a prison ship in New York Harbor. One name among thousands the British never bothered to record, while the operation she'd helped build kept running without her, and eventually helped win a war she didn't live to see end. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe. Drop a comment with who you think Agent 355 really was. I want to hear your theory, and if you learned something today, smash that like button so more people find this channel.